Chapter 6. As they touched down on the ground, Soan and Joe slid off the side of Obsidian. Their eyes never left the outline of the werewolf, who remained on the tail of Obsidian. It was as if the werewolf was assessing its position.
Given our short time together,
Oriel said.
we would do well to get started. Werewolf, you wanted to make a proposal. Make it, but get off his tail now, or be prepared for a rocky ride into the night sky.
The werewolf dismounted and stood still for a moment apart from his hands trembling. He then sat down, trying to look as harmless as possible. A second later, he howled a shortened howl, but it was still loud and piercing.
We agreed you wouldn't do that again.
Oriel shouted in a loud whisper.
I told you, it's a tick. I can't control it.
You're wasting time.
Obsidian interrupted.
What is your proposal?
We are at war with another species on this planet. They are of the sea and we are of the land. However, they are quickly evolving into flying creatures, and they may have visions of occupying our lands. Already we have seen their encroachment on a mountainside that borders the sea. They are making a land camp there.
The werewolf clenched his hands in frustration.
Our proposal is that you,
The werewolf turned to Oriel for a moment.
and perhaps you, would help us discourage these sea dragons from becoming land dwellers. You would help us deliver this message unequivocally so that the sea dragons understand that the sea is safe. The land is, well, it is not safe.
And what do we get in return?
Obsidian asked.
A pact that we will never harm any of you as long as you dwell here. We will even give you a territory in which you can live peacefully and without any outside intervention, by us or anyone else.
And that's the whole extent of the pact?
Well, of course, there would be mutual defense from enemies or invaders of any kind.
Obsidian eyed his fellow travelers.
What do you think?
In principle, it seems plausible and helpful to us.
Soin replied first.
Given that we have less than one experience on this planet and very little time to decide our next steps, having a pact such as this could prove useful.
For the first time since landing, Joe released his eyes from the werewolf, turning to Obsidian.
Can I ask him a question?
Of course.
Obsidian bobbed his head. Joe returned his gaze to the werewolf, sitting 10 meters away. Behind the werewolf, an eerie light colored the horizon a violet red.
If we help you push the sea dragons back into the sea, then we will be their enemies too. Whereas we could just leave you here, continue to fly south and simply take our own territory.
He paused, glancing at Obsidian.
We have fire and a weapon that is obviously more powerful than anything else on your planet. Are you suggesting that if we were to take this course, you would pursue us and make us your enemy?
You would leave us no choice.
The werewolf almost bellowed.
However, I wouldn't say you'd be enemies. We would simply look at you as a weapon, as you just said, the most powerful weapon on our planet, and we would want to have access to that weapon. If the sea dragons were to seize it first, we would be helpless to defend our land. Our families and tribe would be in constant danger.
The werewolf spread out his long, sinuous arms.
What kind of life is that, living in constant fear of fire from above? We would prefer to have you friendly to our cause, working together, protecting one another.
How large is your tribe?
Obsidian asked.
It is large.
Give me a number.
Look for yourself.
The werewolf replied, sweeping his arms toward the horizon. All of them instantly squinted and saw that they were surrounded on all sides. Hundreds, possibly thousands of tall, thin, bipedal shapes were staring at them from a good distance. One could only presume that werewolves were not so rare on this planet. They had landed in the center of a large, circular field. Its perimeter was a thick forest, only 100 meters away. Many of the figures standing at the edge of the tree line looked to be holding weapons of some kind, but in the thin, dawning light, it was impossible to tell what they were. Sowen was the first to speak.
As you know, we are new to this planet. Perhaps this is the reason we were plucked from our respective realities and set down in yours to help you in your cause. However, is your cause to kill sea dragons or to secure peace between you and them?
A werewolf, somewhere in the perimeter, let out a loud howl which was met with utter silence.
Of all the beings on this planet,
The werewolf said,
if they are on the land, we can communicate. The creatures of the sea, we cannot. They are deaf to us and we to them. How can you secure peace between two species that cannot communicate a single word?
I do not know.
Sowen answered.
Don't you think it would be better to do that first? Make an effort before you use the sheer power of this dragon to ensure you will never be able to communicate in the future.
You see, there is a wrinkle in this situation that I have not explained yet.
The werewolf admitted reluctantly.
And what is that wrinkle?
Oriel asked.
Our food sources have dwindled. Members of my kind are carnivores and predators. As our numbers have grown, the animals we feed upon have shrunk. A few of us have killed sea dragons for food. They are quite delicious to our palate, so while we wish to force them back into the sea, we also want a method to hunt them for food.
Well,
Oriel began.
that is more than a wrinkle. It is a
It's a life and death dilemma.
Sowen finished her sentence and continued.
So, in addition to wanting our help to push them back into the sea, you want us to help you hunt these animals for your food.
Yes, with your dragon, well, he could spot the creatures and grab them from the sea when they get close to the surface, and then he could carry them to our encampment, wherever that might be at the time. I mean, obviously, we would set up camps close to the sea. We know these sea dragons are heavy.
He paused for a moment.
And of course, we'd also share the bounty with the four of you. You need to eat, too, right?
Joe shook his head.
We would first need to meet these sea dragons and try to talk with them. Before we can serve your objectives, we need information that can only come from the sea dragons. Just because you can't communicate doesn't mean we can't. We should try to do that first, and then if we can't communicate, we can reconsider our course of action.
He turned to Oriel and Obsidian.
We have to do that first. That has to be the way we proceed. It has to be.
There was a pleading intensity to his voice.
We agree.
Sowen said, without so much as a single doubt. Obsidian raised his head, and as he did, strange cackling sounds could be heard all around them in the far distance.
What do you think, Oriel?
I agree. We need to at least try and communicate with the sea dragons before we commit our strength to the werewolves.
There you have it, werewolf. We've made our decision.
Obsidian said, his tone resolute. With each passing minute, the field brightened with the rising sun. The werewolves in the distance were easier to see and less threatening because now their numbers looked more like 300 instead of 3,000. And their weapons? They looked like long, pointed sticks.
All that remains is for you to tell us how to find the Sea Dragon land camp, and then we will be on our way.
The werewolf stood up and stretched his arms a bit.
My name is Hunter of the Hunted, but those who know me simply call me Hunter, less of a mouthful.
He smiled,
You were right. You are more reasonable in the daylight.
Oriel observed.
I am Oriel, and this is Obsidian, and over there is Soin, the one without hair, and the other is Joe.
Hunter nodded to each of them in turn.
My tribe is well behaved, especially during the day when we mostly rest and sleep. Those assembled here are but a small representation. I don't tell you this as a threat, but rather so you know that it is not so easy to go elsewhere on this planet and simply take a territory for your own. We have tribes throughout the land. Some are less reasonable than mine. I assure you,
Where can we find this sea dragon encampment you speak of?
Joe asked.
You are absolutely certain that you will not accept our proposal until you first try to speak with the sea dragons. Is that true?
Hunter asked. Obsidian nodded, as did the rest of his fellow travelers. Hunter walked over to a patch of dirt and with his bony finger started to draw a crude map. When he was done, he pointed to a spot.
We are here. The sea dragons are there.
He pointed behind him.
You need to fly in that direction. When you see the water, hug the shoreline to your right. You'll run into them shortly thereafter, and they will see you unless you go at night.
Okay, and then my final question is, how do we find you?
Don't worry, we'll find you.
With that, Hunter got on all fours and ran to the perimeter where his tribe was gathered, anxious to hear what had been discussed and what their plan was.
Is anyone hungry?
Obsidian asked.
Let's get in the air
Soan counseled.
before we worry about food.
Oriel took flight, and in a moment, Joe and Soin resumed their places on Obsidian's back.
You in the back. Are you tucked in and ready to go?
But before they could answer, a loud howl echoed in the field as the circle of werewolves converged upon the center, galloping like wild horses.
Wait,
Hunter shouted.
we want a representative to come with you.
Why?
Obsidian asked, turning to face Hunter. Hunter continued walking toward Obsidian, his head down as if gathering his thoughts. Soan leaned within inches of Joe.
We have never seen werewolves before. We know absolutely nothing about them. And yet, we have an instinctual fear that leaves us worried beyond worry.
Joe whispered his admission.
I'm with you.
Let me put it this way.
Hunter began.
We have no influence when you go to meet with these sea dragons. We have given you all of the influence in the next decision, and we have reconsidered the logic of this choice, that I took on behalf of my tribe without the benefit of their consultation.
You just said that you've killed some of them for food.
Obsidian remarked with a wisp of incredulity.
If you are present when we try to communicate with them, don't you think they'll see us, not as impartial negotiators, but under your influence, as if we are emissaries of the werewolves?
What you say is true, I cannot deny it, but we can argue that it wasn't our clan that killed them, and that we are being brought to the negotiation table at the behest of you, an impartial interlocutor.
Hunter bobbed his head as he finished speaking and looked into the glistening, amber orbs of the dragon's face with reverence.
Are you the representative?
Oriel asked.
I could be if you desire it so.
Oriel flew with a few feet of Obsidian and whispered in his ear.
Do we have a choice? If we say no, do you think they will simply walk away and let us leave peacefully?
Obsidian rose up and began flapping his giant wings.
If you want to come along, you'd better get aboard, because I'm leaving now.
All of the werewolves stepped back except Hunter, their heads tilted upward in awe of the mighty dragon. Hunter quickly maneuvered himself to the tail section and jumped aboard. In the next moment, they were airborne, setting off on their next journey to the sea and their meeting with the sea dragons.